Excuse me. All right. What else is going on? There was a big old FF16 info dump.
Everything today.
They showed off some big old footage with Clive slash Ifrit versus Garuda Benedicta.
Mm-hmm.
And alongside that was an interview with Yoshi P. And boy, were there some choice quotes to pull from this.
So before we get into the quotes, I want to talk about what the gameplay footage looks like. It looks like Devil May Cry is what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm the thing is, when they kind of went, okay, so you're only controlling the main one character and everyone else in the party is going to be just AI controlled. I kind of wince initially because I think back to like original P3, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think back to just like, damn it, I want to control the party. But if you go all the way in on just a character action Final Fantasy
game,
then it's like, okay, no, this makes sense. This is fine. The genre has shifted. This is actually going to make sense. Yeah, that footage it shows off a lot of that, and then of course
left trigger is switched between your different summons, which are your skill sets or your styles. I saw Snatch, I saw Trick. It is wildly inspired by Devil May Cry.
I had a thought as I was watching this, and it's more about just like the evolution of the genre as time has gone on. Final Fantasy has clearly been willing to, like, not commit its identity to being a turn-based RPG.
Right.
It's more so committed to like its narrative, and when you look at like the first games, you think back to like, okay, this came from a time when, RPG battles were turn-based. Out of tradition, out of utility, out of necessity and limitations at the time, and it just made sense.
A lot of times it was in reference to like the way combat rounds would proceed in Dungeons and Dragons.
Of course, right? You know, you established that like you took your turn and then the enemy took theirs, and that's how you tabletop. As time goes on, they were willing to go like, well, video games have gotten a bit more sophisticated. Let's add active time battle. Let's mix it up. Let's do some stuff that's a bit more
actiony.
And specific to what video games can do, right? Now we're at a point where each of these genres, we kind of look at them and they have their place and like there's a thing to like, well, I want a turn-based game because I'm in the mood for that. It's a different level of like problem solving as opposed to like the stress of a timer. And then you watch Final Fantasy go forward and become like, now we're going full action game. It's stopped being, it's danced with it. It's done a little bit of action, but still active a little bit. You saw the FF7 obviously like hybrid, but then, you know, ever since like, I guess, 12, I guess, right? Like going full action. It's kind of interesting because when I see it end this phase now, I can imagine another couple of years where it stays in this place and it goes wherever video game technology can go. But does this mean that, like, if the goal is just the narrative is the focus and the gameplay genre can shift to whatever video games can do, if we get to a point where there's something else that becomes more realistic or more cinematic, I'll say that, right? Not just QTE battles, but like a way to play a video game that like emulates the feeling of combat in a more like movie-like way. Could you see things shifting again towards that if that starts to become the norm in video games?
No. So 10 was the last true turn-based Final Fantasy game, right? 11 and 14 are MMOs, and they have MMO combat. They have MMO combat of their own era. Right, FF11 has old style MMO combat, very long, very slow, very chill. 14 has cooldown, hotbar combat, tab targeting stuff. 12 is a fucking spreadsheet simulator. 12 is like 12 is not turn based. 12 is fucking punch in your robots and have them auto battle for you. It's a programming game. 13 was was like that 13's was like the most actiony they could have ever made their own classic turn-based system. And then 13.2 and then 13.3 were pushing more and more action.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we have FF7 remake. Sorry. Then you have 15, which is a bad action game with bad controls. Then you have 7 remake, which is a good turn-based action game with decent controls.
Yes.
And now that we've all the way gone to 16, where they're like, if we're gonna do these action type things, we should probably have somebody who makes action games help us make this. So we're there. This feels like the natural end point. Like, it feels like they will be making like more actiony style of these games because it fits like the flow of the narrative the best.
And it's
like,
it's cool to watch, and it definitely feels as if like when you think about how they want an FMV to look, like if it's like if we're filming a fight, we're showing you how that looks. We want you to be able to play out something that feels closer to that, right? And this is not me. I'm not saying hypothetically what I would want. That's not what I'm getting at. It's more just the idea that like FF is willing to change its genre based on what video games can do. So if that continues to increase in the future, like, do we see these games kind of like sitting in this place and then moving elsewhere, or like or not?
They'll be here for a while, I guess. But like,
that'd be fucking sick because this shit looks awesome. But
you made a good point going all the way back to like, when did ATB start? Was that like 4 or like?
I don't know when ATB started.
Like, that game series has like almost never, going back to like the 90s, been a pure turn-based RPG like menu combat. They have always wanted it to feel actiony. That was right, and this just feels like it took 20 years to actually get there.
Oh, there we go. All right, cool. We're back. So no, and that
gone while I was gone.
Nice. That little break, I had I guess a second to kind of like collect my thoughts. I'm like, okay, what am I trying to say here? And I think I'm like, it was a gamble that FF as a franchise kept experimenting and tweaking and changing the formula around with combat and stuff. But I think it's really cool that like they're only really married to the narrative idea and not anything else. And at this point, it kind of, Final Fantasy has just become like something else. But like, I'm obviously, as someone who likes action games, I'm very happy that it's going in this direction. I think that's rad as shit. I never liked ATB as much because like if I want turn-based, I kind of want to be able to stop and think, or if I want action, I'm going to go all in. So that was kind of how I felt about that phase of it. But like the fact that they're just kind of like, yeah, let's just do what works, what's cool, what feels like the closest to the type of story we want to tell over time is awesome, to just not be super duper married to what it is. And it is
the only true anthology series in video games.
With what that word means, right? Like the fact that Yakuza switches over to an RPG as a bit, but then commits to it, that's great.
Weird.
Yeah, weird, but great, right?
It's the opposite of this.
It is, right? But at the same time, I think about how I'm like, well, if I ever went to check out Dragon Quest, I know exactly what I'm getting. Not any more, not any less. It's going to be this, plus whatever character narrative and perhaps subsystems there are. But like, I like that this is...
Ironically enough, Like a Dragon is also like that. You know exactly what a Like a Dragon game is like.
Right. But like, I like that this is how things have ended up with FF. That's pretty cool. At the same time, I guess I also think of like, well, the more action oriented or a game is, probably the less like, let's say like Punch Mom, for example, is gonna like be able to deal with it. FF7R, which I loved, the hybrid system there. She kind of had to have it on the easier setting where it more or less just asks you for your occasional action input, but like the combat stuff is sort of minimized. There are people I know as well that are like, I want RPGs to always not be about timing.
Hmm.
And I get that. I get that. You know, but it is something where I'm just like, I fucking love that this is what Final Fantasy is becoming. That's rad as shit, man.
Yeah,
Like, biased as fuck. It's super
as
cool.
somebody who watched the gameplay, there was something else that I was like, "Oh wow, it's really an action game. This doesn't look like much. It doesn't look like it plays much like Final Fantasy at all." And then there's a gameplay sequence in the demo in which they have a throwdown with Garuda, and I'm like, "Okay, cool. Oh, cool cutscene." And then the main character doesn't fight Garuda. The main character fights fucking Suparna and Chirata. And the first thing they fucking do is start throwing crisscrossing AoE patterns on the fucking floor. And I'm like, oh man. This is like...
It's leaking in. It's leaking in.
The Final Fantasy 14 shit is gonna be all over
leaking.
this shit.
The seal has been cracked. Well,
like I can't wait until like people are having to dodge like Ifrit's bacon AoE.
But if a big fucking MMO pattern drops on the ground and starts like doing its shapes, and then the game's like, okay, but press R1 to like deke to the side and fucking like skate away from it, that's fine. I'm down with that. Right? And then the boss is also like flying at you at the same time as you're doing those dodges and you're doing the close combat. Fuck yeah. Super down for that.
Anything that Titan will have an untelegraphed move that knocks you off a platform. Bet you anything.
Okay. I mean,
and they will also have an AoE that grows from the exterior of the goddamn stage over and over.
I mean, I bet Rama's gonna throw some lightning at the ground. And
no, I bet you will have to absorb lightning balls to get a debuff to hit Rama.
Sure. Yeah, no, that shit was rad. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, how many times can you watch as like a franchise slowly becomes the thing you love? You know what I mean?
No, the opposite of the usual.
Like, it's like, sorry, yeah, let's go. You know, but I also of like, well, let's see how it goes a couple from now, and let's see what else they do. Let's see what else how it evolves. You know. Well, anyways, I was gonna get to the interview. Something else though?
Oh no. The last thing is like the devil trigger bar seen on the health bar is like literally the limit break bar from 14.
Yes.
Like
yes.
It's the same, like not font, but it's the same typography. It's the same exact color. Like it's...
I mean, you're looking at that. I'm looking at the part where the HP stops being numbers and becomes 2 fucking bars on the screen. And I'm just like, let's go. Let's fucking go, man. I love a life bar. I love a life bar. It doesn't tell you exactly the same information as accurately as numbers can, but I fucking love it regardless.
Hey, let me ask you a question. I have a really... so, which life bar do you prefer? The life bar that extends and then goes no and needs a second line? Like the Devil May Cry?
Yes.
Or, and this is only for enemies, the life bar that starts out as a different color than the regular life bar, and then you beat it to the bottom, and it's still a different other color.
The classic. I mean, obviously there's the Sephiroth bit, but like my first thought of that is actually Final Fight, right? You swing at boss, and he turns like silver on his life bar, and you're like, what? Yeah, like,
life bar.
Like, what? And what are we gonna go from silver into what, man? Yeah, no, I like when, you know, just extra shapes and additions and bullshit starts getting added onto it in a way that just like, it's like, what? How far is this going? We could just stack them both on top of each other. Fuck yeah. Also, give me a game where I can do a Sephiroth and I can make my stats go off screen. Let it break.
Probably play Stranger of Paradise.
Oh, okay. Anyways, so yeah, Yoshida sat down and he said a couple things. He's had some.
He said a lot of
He had
things
some
that people are
hot
taking
takes.
way out of context.
Hot takes. Well, let's start with this one. The reason why Ifrit is the main icon is because we felt sorry for him. Usually, Ifrit is the first summon you get.
Absolutely.
And he ends up getting either A, replaced by way better summons as you go on in the game, or B, you get to dunk on him first as like the initial trainer introduction to the feature, so he just gets completely forgotten about. So this time around, they're giving him the spotlight.
Yeah,
Sure.
100%.
Sure.
If it's like the number, so he ends up being like one of the most recognizable summons, obviously, because you always get to him first. You always get to him first. He's always the first one on the roster, either fighting or getting part of your party.
Yeah.
Like FF7, the first one you get is Ifrit, and you're like, wow, a summon, and then right into the trash as soon as Shiva comes along.
Fucking 8, right? You get Ifrit and Shiva, and then I think you get like fucking whatever snake right out, like,
Snake?
but it's like
Leviathan
right after. Yeah, and it's just like fair. Let him get his shine. Fair. The when asked about, so FF16 will not be delayed unless a meteor falls on Japan.
I appreciate the use of the thematically appropriate natural disaster.
And then there was an interesting one here. In Japan, they don't use the term JRPG. It's a Western term, and it's mainly considered something that is kind of a touchy subject with some devs because it had some negative connotations about 15 years ago or so. That's an interesting one because, like, there definitely is, like, I remember, like, we'd call them JRPGs going back to, like, SNES and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But there was I guess a middle point when, you know, we were rising up through the Xbox 360.
Let's call it the Phil Fish era.
Where go ahead.
Video game coverage got like wildly xenophobic. Like weirdly xenophobic. Where like Japanese games are just terrible, man. Oh god, why do games have to do boss fights are over. When are we gonna be done with boss fights? They're just terrible.
I think the age of boss fights has come to an end. It's time we moved on from boss fights.
And we still see there's a tweet people are making fun of right now on my timeline of like interface designers from Western games like just shitting their pants angry at Elden Ring for being so popular and just nitpicking the most insane fucking like complaints about its interface because like is this a oh god I gotta find this fucking awful tweet. So goddamn stupid. I saw Chris and Gene making fun of it earlier because it's so stupid. Here it is. Not being able to equip armor from the inventory and having to go to a separate equipment game is its own level of hell. All From Software games, and in my opinion, almost all games of Japanese origin, have a UI problem. Could it be a difference in usability mental model across regions? Yeah, you're right. Using the equipment screen is Japanese only and old-fashioned and stupid. Holy
usability
shit.
mental models across regions. Is that a fancy way of saying do the Japanese think different?
Yeah, it is.
Is that fucking the great Ace Attorney? You Nipponese sure are a different breed.
Oh, that's crazy.
Your UI systems, they elude me.
And a lot of this was like in reference to like that Ubisoft made Elden Ring mock-up.
Yeah,
you remember that fucking thing?
I do remember that
screenshot. All over the
screenshot.
screen?
I do.
And
I do.
It's just yeah, it makes perfect sense that they don't call their own games JRPG. Some morons are taking this quote as like a abandonment of the genre that the company made. It's like, no, people were fucking weird
Yeah,
about
no.
RPGs and JRPGs back in the aughts and early tens.
Now, well before that, the distinguishing factors I remember were like, no, it's because when you say Western RPG, you think of like
Baldur's Gate, usually.
the things that are a bit
Fallout.
more etc, and like might even be first person, might even involve like text prompts and things like that if you go back old enough.
The usual breakdown was, how open-ended is it? Does it have a really centralized narrative? It's probably from Japan. Does it have a more open-ended, go anywhere narrative? It's usually from like California or Alberta.
And maybe I just, just kind of made my own brains little things too as well. But I was like, yeah, JRPGs, especially back then, you'd have a party, you'd have
Yeah.
usually again it would be a third person in most cases, yeah, and so on. But like, yeah, there was that weird in between phase, I think, that just created a sour taste there. It
But
also,
Wooly, you have to remember, a lot of role-playing games from Japan look anime. And in the parlance of the day, anime is fucking gay.
right,
Do you remember that?
right, right.
Oh shit! Look at Dante! Oh my god!
So that was also, it was interesting too, because that bled right into a time when Japan as a game, as a where Japanese video games were also like economically suffering. They weren't outputting as many huge hits as they used to as well, right? It was that period in which Square Enix was undergoing some major identity crisis moments, trying to and different. We were watching each major studio reach out to different Western smaller companies and seeing if they were going to take a crack at a number of franchises. Right? Capcom did it, Konami did it, Square definitely did it a bit, and like we kind of were looking at when Platinum were coming out and going, we are like the pride that needs to carry Japanese development forward, and we need to kind of save the situation. So that was kind of the tail end of it.
The attitude that was the prevalent at the time was like, it was awful. Not just like, there's the Phil Fish thing where a Japanese developer went to GDC to ask a genuine question, to which like his nationality and industry were insulted in front of a big crowd of people. Like, awful. But also, like, this attitude of like, Japanese games was directly responsible for like Keiji Inafune ruining like 5 years of Capcom games.
Not good. Strider was
Oh,
awesome.
they gotta be like Western.
Strider was
They
awesome.
suck ass, dude.
Some of them.
Strider was good.
Strider was good.
Wasn't Strider made by a Western team trying to make it like a Japanese video game?
Pretty much, but they were hired as like, let's give a Western team this property that we own.
No, it's just
Yes.
like, oh fuck.
And obviously, Rearmed is pretty sick too. So there's good stuff that came out of there. Make no mistake. I also feel that like there was potential stuff as well that sounded really interesting. Like, all in all, the movement that got involved with like talking to some Western studios about their take on some of these franchises led to some stuff that was pretty cool. But
Yeah, totally, and some stuff that could have been really cool.
yeah. So, no blanket statements. But yeah, the sentiment, it makes sense that like now when they're like, okay, some of this still exists and whatnot, that Yoshi would be like, hey, that term kind of is a bit of a sore spot with some people because it just reminds them of that. And people that have been around from like the fourth generation might not be in games anymore, but the people who are
Yeah,
around,
because they're 90.
yeah, but the people who are like getting their teeth cut on 360 era certainly would be like seniors at this point,
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing to learn there.
It's definitely fascinating, because like that whole discourse and all that feeling was like out here, but you never got the impression that it ever radiated out back to Japan, because I never heard it. I never heard it talked about.
Yeah.
ever.
Ideally, right? Like you would have JRPG just be a qualifier in the exact same way as WRPG, or
Well, the funniest thing is that WRPG was attempted as a genre descriptor. And let me tell you, as somebody who has played most of the games that technically fall underneath that description, it is even worse of a qualifying descriptor than JRPG is. It is every RPG that's not from Japan or in the style of any Japanese RPG that has come out. It usually just meant Elder Scrolls. That's what it was usually just used as. Like, well, that's not a JRPG. This is a Western RPG like the Oblivion or the Skyrim because they're good. And it's like at that point, a fucking Western RPG usually actually meant the game came out insanely buggy. Both Baldur's Gate games, Fallout, Torment, Pillars, every Elder Scrolls game, definitely The Witcher, just came out like the buggiest fucking thing in the world.
So immediately I was going to say, like, then my brain goes right to further subdivisions like CRPG, where that is a horrible, like, nomenclature.
Terrible nomenclature, but it's really specific.
Yes, it's old D&D style, full-on pen and paper systems, right?
It is an isometric game that has an underlying pen and paper system that you control with a mouse, and you usually pause.
But how the fuck is the word computer RPG supposed to convey
you have
that
to play
shit?
it with a mouse.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's on the computer.
So that's
the genesis of that term. It's stupid.
So that sucks. But yeah, here we are, right? Anyway, and like I'm sure Euro RPG is can be a thing, and like
no. Europe gets its own genre by itself.
Of just Eurojank.
Eurojank.
Okay, but outside of the little circle of fucking us and the weirdos that listen to us, like what would
Eurojank is people
Eurojank is blanket, huh? Yeah.
Anybody that listens to a gaming podcast knows what Eurojank is. And I want to point out that Eurojank on the east side just gets that little, it gets Kiev in there. It gets that little piece of Ukraine in for the European need.
But now the RPG and the first-person shooter and the action game in the third person that come from Europe are all the same genre.
That's right, they really are. Hey man, it's so we get to this discussion once a year, and that discussion is that genres in most media are terrible, but genres in video games are actually the worst. They are totally useless. Almost every other genre in every other medium describes tone or theme only. And in video games, they also have to describe perspective and generalized mechanics. It's awful. And some places, country of origin.
Shut up and watch me die on a hill called Button Bashers.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say, shut up and watch me die on the hill that is rating this year's best action-adventure game.
Action/adventure, yeah.
My God.
Yeah. No, the actual worst, right? What are you doing? Where is the camera? Are there numbers? Where is it from? Yeah, pretty much that.
Is it scary? No. Like, no, seriously.
Do the rooms change every time you walk into them?
Yeah.
Is it scary?
Like, yeah, man,
it's the stupidest. It's the dumbest. Fucking
total genre inversion. If it's scary.
God, it's so. What a worthless medium.
Tell me why Resident Evil 5 is survival horror and fucking Dead Space is survival horror, but Gears of War is a cover shooter action game, third-person shooter.
How
and
is
it's because
how
Gears
is
of War isn't scary enough.
how
That's
is
the stupidest part.
how is your reward distribution system? Right? Yeah.
How many other players can you play with at a time?
A few? A lot? A whole lot? And then and how many players did you start with, and do you end with the same number?
Yeah. Like, a massively multiplayer online game is a game in which you can play it with 100 or more people at once. Oh, you mean like a battle royale?
No, shut up.
No,
Stop it. Okay. Is there an arena?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate it. Anyway, so we got that which was quite interesting. Then he said, "Hey man, if you like fishing or blitzball, fuck off, because this is a story about countries at war, and there's no time to play sports or pass the time when people are dying at war." Hard cut to Shepard dancing, just kind of going, huh?
So there's more to that quote that I believe actually explains more. Hold on, Blitzball, FF16.
Oh yeah,
I was
can
trying
pull it
to
up.
find it earlier. Because like that showed up as a thread on the subreddit, but I actually got deleted because it lacks context.
Fuck
But
triple triad.
But I'm having trouble actually finding. He mentions that there is an area like within the game that you can basically chill out, so it's not doom and gloom at all times, because that would be like horrible and oppressive. But I can't find it. I'm having trouble finding the article itself, because he did interviews with like 35 different fucking places this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I
I had it open earlier.
Found it. That was easy. Type in Blitzball into Twitter.
Yeah, we have some very dark themes that the story revolves around. We have countries at war. We can't really have some blitzball matches going on when people are killing each other. And when you have this hero who's talking about and driven by revenge, I'm going to go out and fish. In that sense, these aren't the types. There aren't those types of light things that are going to detract from the story that we're trying to tell.
Yeah, so the follow-up to that is, however, if you remember from the presentation, talked about Sid, and Sid has this organization. Their headquarters is this place called the Hideaway. Once Clive meets up with Sid and is able to join, then you have a kind of hub for where all the side content that's separate from the main story starts. So we have these things like quests where you can learn about people in Hideaway, or quests where you can learn about the people, quests where you can help upgrade Clive, earning more inventory, blah, blah, blah. There are other types of activities, such as the hunt board, where you'll see the billets. It'll talk about notorious monsters roaming the land, and your task is trying to defeat this monster for fame. So it's like there is side stuff and there is cooldown. It just isn't going to be like of kind of like total levity, like blitzballing while Sin is wrecking towns three doors over.
No, I'm more than happy to play triple triad in the trenches as the dirt lands on the cards. While you eat a ration, have a smoke, and try to fucking make some light of the situation.
Blitzball and Triple Triad and the Gold Saucer are like and Tetramaster are like so violently out of their own context.
Like Blitzball and Triple Triad, yes. The Golden Saucer is the most egregious of all, because you can't just fucking waste time wherever you are. You have to physically leave the important places and go to it.
Yeah,
you have
right.
To,
hey,
you have to say, fuck off.
Hold on, man. We gotta hop in the airship and fly for an hour to get to the Gold Saucer, because I need to play snowboarding, dude.
And dying people around the world are happening while the employees of the Golden Saucer continue to wear their outfits and be like, "Welcome on, come on in, welcome back. What do you want today?" And like, you have to actively. It's the difference between like you're in a fucking war zone and there's bodies around you and there's a fire that needs putting out, but you pull out your Steam Deck, or or you book a ticket, jump on a plane, and fly to Vegas. Like, it's it's a whole other level of crazy. But yes, I agree.
They also talked about how it's a semi-open structure. Like, you'll have zones to explore, but it is definitely not an open world, because they feel like the open world concept like shackles a lot of stuff behind a lot of bloat, which I totally agree with 100%.
Truth. Spitting truth. 30 or 60 FPS, 35 to 37 hours or so, 11 plus hours of story.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Chunky game.
That's chunk.
Yeah.
Boy, I mean, it's quite honest of them to just straight up tell you a third of this game is going to be FMV.
Unless you do all the side content, and then it's 1/8.
And those estimations were based on you not dying anywhere significantly, or dying at all, for that matter. There's going to be a demo 2 weeks before launch. And yeah, the other important thing is, yes, FF16 is on a 6-month limited time exclusive with PS5, but that does not mean that the PC version will be released in half a year.
Yeah.
I will make it clear the PC version will not come out in half a year. So the time limit doesn't mean it's going to be they're waiting to drop it.
Mark your calendars.
Right. And then, of course, there was he kind of dropped this in the middle of talking about that stuff, but he says essentially that he was making it with the thought of it being the best game in the world.
Oh, that's nice.
So, please play it, but don't expect the PC version to not take time, seeing as they're trying to make, quote unquote, the best game in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that game will probably be pretty okay.
Yeah. I am looking forward to this. I'm also looking forward to seeing what happens with FF7R2, but the whole bold new direction, so to speak, is incredibly exciting. That's super dope.
I think this is also part of Yoshi P's master plan to get people to play 14. It shares most of the same staff, but also, like, the control layout is really simple. Like, you're holding down the trigger to tap your buttons to fire off your cooldowns.
I mean, like, I guess we'll have to see if, like, we get little nods and references here and there, or if we get, like, main menu screens that are like, click here now to get your free trial for 30 days.
I would think the funniest thing in the world would be like, did you enjoy, like, credits, and it goes Faye, like it always does, like, did you have a good time? Have you heard about Final Fantasy 11? Here you go. Here's a link to a website. You can learn about Final Fantasy 11.
The Icon's adventures continue in... Just logo pops up.
Vanadil.